And as well, I'll be launching it on Facebook.
Here you need to go to ACSM page.
Right.
So I just need to give a title and then go live and you're done.
Okay.
Perfect.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are going live. Now I feel like a radio host.
Oh my God. Good.
All right, cool. So once again, welcome to our live webinar. Today we'll be talking about cross-cultural pitfall in the world of coaching. And it's a very, very interesting topic, especially being in Malaysia. And Marianne has about 25 years, going around different countries from Luxembourg to Japan and in Malaysia. So Marianne, can you share with us your experience, in going through the different culture?
So I've been working in Luxembourg, where we have the European institutions and quota per nationality. So you have different cultures within a small countries, and you have no option but to lead teams with multicultural diversity. And when I was working in Japan, I also had encountered plenty of different culture. And Malaysia has also this rich multicultural diversity. So I'm sometimes asked about cross-cultural coaching. Is that really working? And actually, about over the 500 plus people that have been coaches, probably not more than 25% are from the same culture or are speaking the same language as me. And so if that was not effective, then I won't be in business anymore. So I'm a living proof that actually a cross-cultural coaching does work. And yet it doesn't come with challenges too, in the sense that the connection at first is not necessarily that easy.
So it does play a very important role when it comes to coaching. Can you give us an example of your experience, especially in Malaysia or in European country or in UK?
So, for example, coaching rarely starts by digging very deep and right away in a subject. You would have a little bit of a small chat first. And if I have someone from the UK over the phone went for coaching, we'll spend 2-3 minutes talking and chatting about the weather, which doesn't sound terrifically enticing, and even less interesting in Malaysia, where in tropical area, the weather is rather the same all over the year. But in Malaysia, you would very commonly have the question, have you eaten? Or speaking about food, which may not be so terrific for other cultures. And at first, a bit surprising. So you need to find out before you start, what is the common way to engage with people? And not being triggered or shocked, because it's not because someone has asked you, have you eaten? That is actually an invitation for lunch. It's just a polite way to say, how are you doing?
I see. And those are the common questions asked in different culture setup. But is it also important to know about the history of the culture? Like, for example, why in Malaysia people ask, have you eaten? Mainly because in those days, back in our grandfather's generation, food was scarce, So when they ask, have you eaten? It's more of a concern that, hey, do you have enough to eat for the day? So how do you think in terms of going back to the history of the culture prior to the coaching?
So if we can afford to do that, it's fantastic, because it helps to have a better understanding, also helps finding out what's the perspective of the coaching. Yet it's not always even affordable. We may not be able to do that. And for some people, they may not even be conscious about their history. So it's good if we can do, but that should not be an obstacle for coaching. Though, if we are shocked by something as coming from a different culture, we need to go a bit deeper and finding out what's the value. And here the value was about caring, was about connecting, making sure that you would not miss too much.
Right.
And so if you go to the value at that level, we can definitely connect and finding that, yeah, we also share that same value. I fully can understand.
Okay. So those are the do's and don'ts. And before we go into values, are other things that we need to look into the information, like for example, festive season, do they, as simple as that, do they play an important role?
So I would say that if you would ever need to meet the Queen of England or the Sultan or the next king in Malaysia, you would not go just like that and hey buddy, right?
That's right. There's a protocol.
There's a protocol not to shock everyone. So there's a way to address, and you need to know what are the different level of politeness, so that how do you want the other person to address to you, and how do they want you to address them. So that's definitely something that you need to care about, and you need to gather information or ask other coaches on how is it doing. I mean, for example, in Japanese you have 3 levels of politeness. In French you have 2 levels of politeness, and you would even take for granted that they are going the same way.
I see.
Which is actually not true. Because, for example, if you relate to people in France, you would use initially a very formal way, and then when you know each other better, you would use an informal way, and you will keep on that informal way forever. Whereas in Japan, however close you are to that person, you will start on informal. You would start on formal and if you're really close to that person or you are really feeling safe, you would move to informal. So you would have 5-minute formal and all the rest informal.
Wow.
So that's very different. And you really need to know, because if you use the wrong way, I mean, to that culture, what is seen as wrong, you would definitely shock people.
I see.
So, for example, men and women do not use exactly the same language in Japan. You need to know that. The way you greet people, I mean, shaking hands with Muslim person for a non-Muslim person in Malaysia is not necessarily welcome. And you need to know.
True.
The first time it happened to me, I was wondering, what's wrong with me? What did I do? Why is it that they don't want? And I needed to have someone to explain to me, yeah, that's different.
Yeah.
And so one key about cross-cultural differences is, yes, you need to be prepared, but you also need to be prepared to welcome something that would be very different.
So embracing their culture?
Embracing the surprise.
Okay. All right.
Because I may not absolutely subscribe to their culture and still welcome the difference.
I see.
So there will always be an element of surprise, which I personally absolutely love. And it's about noting these points that, I'm surprised. What does that tell about me? What do I also need to learn so that I welcome the difference? And it's not about comparing one being more than the other. It's about welcoming the difference and finding what's enriching into it.
How to bridge the gaps between the culture as well?
Bridging the gap, or at least connect at a higher level, connecting beyond, finding out what we have in common beyond that differences.
I see.
So not necessarily focusing only on all the difference we have, but also going to that higher level where we are connecting heart to heart, human being to human being, and we can have a lot in common.
I see. And even in terms of, like, for example, the timing or when we set the coaching session does has an impact with festive season, like Christmas or Ramadan.
Yeah, so we need to gather information on what's going on around. So festivals are very important because, for example, if it's a Ramadan month, people will have a different mindset. Should they follow or should they fast or not? They cannot escape the fact that millions of people are fasting, and that affects the culture around. If it's Christmas in Europe, do you celebrate or not, you will see that there is special atmosphere, and you can't escape it. If that's Thanksgiving or if that's the spring season in Japan, these are really special times where people will perform some rituals or will have some family gathering, and so the priority will shift. And so if you do executive coaching, you need to know if that's the right timing or not. And if people are ready to do some coaching, or if they will have so much of their mindset working or busy with something else, that is definitely not the right time. And you need to be careful, and it sounds really silly, but we are all very, very self-centered. So, and there's nothing wrong about that. We're human beings and we're self-centered, and coaching is about really finding to get out of ourselves, to englobe the other in a richer way. So I'll give you an example. I have coaching session regularly with a British lady. And so because we see each other regularly, we had decided that we will meet every Thursday at 9 a.m. So 9 a.m. UK will make 6 or 5 or 4 p.m. here. And so that went very smoothly. And so one day I called her and I just really disturbed her because I called 1 hour earlier. And she was wondering, yeah, I mean, it's daylight. We only have an appointment at 9 a.m. And I was like, yeah, I know it's 9 a.m. just like every time. It's like, yeah, but it's daylight saving. We've changed. So you too, right?
Okay.
And I was like, forgot about it. I've spent 30 years in places where, yes, we changed the time twice a year, but it's not the case in Malaysia where that would not make sense.
Exactly.
And I didn't even think about that time difference. And that change that happens twice a year.
Yeah. Definitely important information to know as a coach, right? The change of the timing and everything, especially if we are coaching someone online and from different parts of the world.
Absolutely. So you need to gather information on how people chit-chat. You need to really pay attention to the festival, to the daylight times, and that can vary from one country to the other. That makes it even more beautiful.
Yeah.
And you need to gather information on elections as well. If there are major politic trends that are happening, the coachee will not escape on everything that is in the newspaper, and that's so prevalent around them that they need to take stands.
I see. So that will impact the coaching process?
That could impact the tension. That could impact the ability to feel safe or not, the ability to express themselves or not. And so you need to know how much freedom they have or what kind of pressures around them, so that you won't push too far if that's not really appropriate in that very context.
How about in a smaller setup in terms of their family culture? What kind of information do we need to know in terms of their family background? Are those important as well?
So that one is really funny because I used to work in Luxembourg, and I spent 10 years at the Central Bank of Luxembourg. I had really very close relationship with my colleagues. We did really fantastic teamwork, and yet I would have it hard to tell how many children they have, even less about the name of their children. Now that I've been working in Malaysia, after you've met someone and you've worked a little bit, one of the questions is how many children do you have, how old are they, etc., where do you live, etc. And in two or three encounters, three meetings, you already know everything about their family. So that's a very different way.
So what you're saying is that in terms of their willingness to share about their family background is different from culture to culture, is it?
About the way they share,
Mm.
also about the distinction between what's private and what's not.
Okay.
And so, what is the hierarchy in terms of values? So, for example, if you talk about family in Japan or family in Malaysia, that would be really a very high priority in terms of value. That would be really highly ranked.
True.
Probably important as well in Europe. But the rate of divorce being very high, people living in cities and not used to have several generations under the same roof, the experience of the family and the notion that it refers to is completely different. So, for example, I had a session with a lady in Malaysia who was really not satisfied with the performance of her staff. And she told me how difficult it was for her to handle it. And I was really very naively asking, so what kind of feedback are you giving if you're not satisfied? And she was really telling me that she was not giving any feedback. She was just tolerating. And I was really wondering, why is it? What's blocking? And then she came with that sentence, like, I can't harm that person because he's my staff. It's just like family. And for me, that was very surprising because family and work in the culture I used to live in are very distinct.
I see.
And so you would not say that your colleagues are part of your family. Or if you do, people would wonder, what's wrong with that person?
Okay.
You really want to be so intimate? So, and they felt very uncomfortable. And so I didn't buy to that story of her feeling really afraid to harm
as a family
and have that staff as a family. And so I started to tell her, but they're not for your family. They like the family. Means they're really not. So if they are not, what can you afford to say? And so she came very logically to that. Find that giving feedback, being more direct, looking for performance, being more assertive. And yet, even if intellectually that fully makes sense to her, she kept telling me, I'm not able to do that. Because in her frame of reference, families being so deep in the values, she couldn't go push further. So what I did is that I leveraged on that, saying, okay, so if that person was your own son and he was working for your sister, how would you feel as a parent? So then you triggered the shame, you triggered the duty, and she came to that growth mindset. I will teach my son, I will talk directly because I want him to grow, I want him to learn, I want him to raise to the standards. And then we had the growth mindset that happened. Okay. The thing is, I could leverage on her values, but I cannot impose my own frame of reference as a coach. So it's about trying to enter as much as possible in their world, build on their own frame of reference, and the fact that I could be from a different culture is helping to resist, to be anchored, and not to buy into the stories that would not help her.
I see. So what you're also saying is that you actually respect her model of the world. You could have just say, oh, you shouldn't see your worker as your family, but you didn't do that. Instead, you went in to see from her perspective and to use that to help her to see another perspective of how she can help her team members.
Yeah. I mean, in cross-cultural coaching, I think it's even more important to remember that you have no right to impose your frame of reference. Your judgment is so relevant to your own frame of reference. It cannot be universal.
True.
So you need to have that mindset of generosity. People have the right and full right to be different, and to then find out what could be interesting in that diversity? How could that be enriching? And more often than not, you will learn through these experiences what is your own culture, what are your own values that most of the time we vastly ignore them, just because we take for granted that everyone's just like us.
Okay, and if let's say you find that the person and yourself have a totally different values, what can you do to align and to see the commonalities? Do you have an example of that?
So, for example, if I had a coach. I was helping for being at ease in public speaking, and I really wonder what was blocking, because he was so at ease singing karaoke in front of 200 people, and I was like, there's no ability problem, right? So it's not a skills issue. What could be blocking? And so I said that it's when I relate to people who are in a higher hierarchy, higher level in the hierarchy, that I began to stutter and I'm shaking, etc. I'm losing every ability I have, and they could be 2 or 3 people only, but they are my bosses. And so little by little, I really had to bring it to supervision. And the supervisor told me, you know, there could be something around authority, and look about who are the figures of authority. And truly enough, I asked him, okay, so when you were a child, who was the authority? And that guy told me, you know, my father was like Hitler.
Okay.
And I was so shocked. Because for a European, I mean, Hitler is just a symbol of the worst you can have, by killing people just because they belong to another race than yours, or have a different religion. And so for us, it's very shameful. And so when I heard that, I really had to breathe deeply before I could react. And it doesn't mean, though, that I cannot connect. I mean, I need to find out what does that mean for him. And for him, that was really, you have no right to answer. You have to respect, you have to obey, whatever it means. So obviously, this is not something I would subscribe to. In no way would I like to bring my children that kind of work. But still, I don't think it is something unethical that I would need to report. It's still something where I can bring a little bit more of understanding and generosity. So bringing him to recognize that, all right, maybe your father was this way. Now, why did he ask for? What was his mindset? And then he find out that that was his way to bring the child up for his greater benefit. So it's about bringing a little bit more of generosity, of that unconditional love, so that yes, I can still admire and appreciate my father, and get rid of that and know that yes, that was relevant in that context, not anymore, and I can be free and I can be who I am when I need to talk to others.
So you change the frame of the situation.
So changing the frame of the situation and being grounded when there's something that, well, for me is so shocking.
So, and at the same time, you have to, what do you call that? Would you be able to find commonalities, especially if someone that is much older than you and from a different religious background? Would you still be able to connect with that person? And do you have an example of that?
So it could be that at first, it seems really, really impossible. Or that you feel that you're really not the right person. Or so having that fraud symptom. And that would be really, really good to bring it to supervision, because once it's been triggered, it can happen many times. Or that you're really different. You know, I'm so impressed that person by what they achieve. Well, this MD is heading 20,000 people. Who am I to talk to that person? And then I just felt paralyzed and I can't really coach well. And that really is something you need to bring to supervision. You need to get help so that you're resourceful and you can really bring the added value. Now, what I really love about cross-cultural coaching is that you can still have sometimes that a higher level connection. So for example, I had someone who's a very senior executive, so older than me, heading a very large company, and Muslim and deeply religious. So he's a man, and I'm definitely very different, and I would have no chance to meet that guy as my neighbor. I mean, we really come from very different worlds.
And this guy is much older than you.
And he's much older. And I'm completely alien to his world. And yet, when we discussed about the values, I've noticed that he came with hope and creator. And I so strongly felt aligned with these values that we even managed to talk about religion, which is really one of the topics I would never ever had dared to address in executive coaching, because in Europe, this is one of the taboo area that you would not address. And so I was not really comfortable getting into that in Malaysia, though in Malaysia it's everywhere. And yet here, with that person who was so aligned with me in terms of values, why we were so different, we managed to have that strong connection and really dig further and do a brilliant coaching together.
So you eventually chunk up the values until you find a common platform. That's how you manage to get connected with people, even from a different culture and different background. That's what you're saying, right?
Yes. What I'm saying too is that you need to find that me too. What do we have in common? Yes, we have so many things different. And yet, as a human being, what do we have in common? What's that me too? Oh, me too and me too. So that we can find a common background. We can find a common interest, or we can find a common frustration, or something that touches our humanity that helps us to connect.
I see. And would there be a point as well that you find that you have totally different and unacceptable values or culture that you decided, okay, this is not for me? What will you do if that would be that time?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes we can face behaviors or mindset or reaction that to us are strongly unethical. And should that be in the same culture or should that be in a different culture? For me, that would be just the same. I mean, I had someone who wanted me to coach him in terms of communication so that he could seduce women quicker and dump them even quicker. That is not, for me, the purpose of coaching.
Yep.
And so once I have discovered that, I decided to stop the coaching, because even if we were from the same culture, we're speaking the same language, this is not my ethics.
But would you attempt to help this person to see what relationship is all about first before you let go of that coaching relationship?
Definitely. That was actually my very first coaching client. I was very junior in that. And I didn't know how to handle that. Probably now I would have it with more experience, digging deeper and finding out what's the relationship, what's meaningful, and why is it that we need to dump people? Why is it that we cannot manage to be able to get close to someone? What's so fearful around that, and all the emotions that are linked to that, and what's the mindset? Unfortunately, I was just beginning, and that was just a nightmare. and I had to go to supervision really for help. It turns out, and I think that this person also had some mental blockage that goes beyond coaching, and I needed help that are not really only able to be covered by coaching.
So I guess at that point of time, supervision will come in very handy.
Yes, supervision was so helpful, because I really started to doubt, why am I doing coaching? Is that something completely wrong, or is my understanding of coaching so different to the coachee that I'm actually doing the right way? Or is it something that I completely missed around coaching that I need to know? Or do I have to handle any issues in coaching or not? So all these questions are quite critical
I see.
to define your own role. And should that be in the same culture or not, it's really something that we need to nail down, and whereas supervision was really helpful.
I see.
Now, there are things that are really unethical or at the edge of being unethical. I would really think that you need to bring it to supervision. Should that be from a cross-cultural perspective or not? This is something where you need to have a strong discussion, just to be sure that, I mean, you better be ready than sorry.
True.
And so I really invite you to attend the webinar on this ethical dilemma by Frances on Friday, where you would know what are the best tips to avoid going into that kind of trouble, or how to handle if there's something.
I see. Cool. And would you mind to share with us some tips on or pitfalls when it comes to cross-cultural coaching? And meanwhile, for the rest of you, if you have any questions, get yourself ready. Think about all the questions they're going to ask, because in a short while, I'll be opening up for Q&A session, yeah? So can you share with us some tips based on your experience, or what are the pitfalls coaching in the world of cross-culture?
So tips, you need to prepare. Just think that you're meeting the Queen of England or the Sultan of Malacca, and you need to get ready to enter their world. So what kind of preparation will you do? Gather information, know how to dress, what are the taboo subjects, how do people relate to each other, what would be polite so that you enter their world.
Okay.
So gather information as well on what's happening around them. And prepare yourself in terms of mindset. So mindset, that would be about curiosity. I'm really eager to find out what's the difference and what is the next thing that would happen. And that's the beauty of cross-cultural coaching, because you always come with something that will surprise you. So welcoming that surprise by being really curious. The second is about difference. Really embracing the fact that people can be different, and there's no right or wrong around that. It's really a way to be richer. And to have a larger open mind, less judgmental, and suspend your judgment. If there's something that's shocking, bring it to supervision. Breathe first, note it down, and bring it to supervision. The other person may not need to know about that, in the sense that that's their culture, that's the way they're brought, and most of the time it's very supportive. If that's not, then you can always at the next session question the way it is, because not every tradition is really helpful. But it may not be from a judgmental perspective. You need to find out first, is that something that's actually about me that I need to understand, or is that something that would be useful for the coaching? Then I would say about generosity.
Generosity? Yeah,
bring that unconditional love as much as you can. Embracing the difference, embracing the variety, and being generous in suspending the judgment. Taking for granted that if people are acting this way, it's probably the best way. And you may not be doing much better if you would have gone through that same experience in that same context, in that same culture. So being generous in that sense, that take for granted that they're doing for a good reason, and that they're doing their best. And the last one would be about that lightness. There's nothing tragic in sometimes not really understanding somebody. I was so afraid when I was starting to coach in English, because I've been trained in French and I started coaching in French. And when I had people telling me, yeah, you're working in English with, on your daily work, are you willing to coach in English? I was like, we'll never be able to do that. How will I understand people? And it comes with practice. And we also need to be a bit light in that sense. It doesn't need to be perfect. And sometimes you will not understand. And you may just be simple enough saying, yeah, can you repeat? Or that word for me is not very familiar. Is there any way to explain it differently?
So being authentic as well.
Yeah, being simple, being authentic,
All right.
and being compassionate, and have the right to fail. It's okay if you don't understand it. And sometimes when you coach in a language that's not your native one, you will come with words that have a very different meaning. So, for example, I was running a group coaching, and we were supposed to be 10, and we happened to be two or three were registered. So I was talking to one of them and saying, yeah, we'll have a very intimate session. Whereas, sorry.
So they get different meaning of the word intimate.
Because intimacy in French is mostly used to say it's cozy, it's friendly, which could be very different in Malaysia. And so they were, what do you mean? And if you are able to handle it with a good laugh, then it makes people even closer and willing to be more vulnerable. Instead of saying, oh my God, I didn't take the right word, and how would people think about me? Yeah, that's part of it.
So those are the tips and on the things. For example, preparation, and then to gather all the information, then to have the right mindset where you are being curious, as well as to embrace the difference between culture and people from different walks of life. And in order to do that, you must have that generosity to truly care, and last but not least, likeness.
Yes.
To keep things simple, be okay to accept things as it is, and be authentic.
Yes.
Okay. And also do you have any resources that you like to share with us in terms of how we can further on? I noticed that there's these 3 books here. Can you share with us about these books?
I have these books. So this one is the Culture Map from Erin Myers. And actually helping to find out people think, lead, and get things done in different cultures. So, for example, she's comparing the way people give feedback in Beijing or in Boston.
Oh, okay.
So that's quite interesting to find out for executive coaching, how people actually have different behaviors and what do they expect.
I see.
So, for example, when in Malaysia, you would be very comfortable by having a feedback that you give to someone for that person to give feedback to the other instead of going direct. Yet that may not be the case in other cultures. And so people may be quite worried if they do not hear from you or they only hear something positive, but actually it's not that positive. So the subtlety may not be easy to grasp. And that's really important to know for yourself to understand how it works as coach, but also sometimes to even raise awareness for your clients. It could be that your coach, she is someone who's managing people from different cultures, and they have no clue around that.
Okay.
And they're facing a lot of communication problems, not knowing where it comes from.
All right.
Then this one that's quite good as well, Managing Across Cultures. That's written by Jean-Louis Barthou. And this one is about the values that are underlying the behaviors that people have at workplaces in different countries, so that we can understand and align at the values, go deeper, and understanding why the hierarchy could be different, and therefore how people can be reacting differently from on the very same situation.
Okay.
And that one is a funny one about the gestures, body language, do and do, don'ts around the word. So that may not be, obviously they're not the only ones, but just to have a sense of having a deeper understanding and also being aware of the differences.
See.
We cannot cover all the differences and learn all about a culture when we prepare for a coaching session. But having a list, gathering information will definitely help to be more vigilant and to have a deeper understanding, welcome the difference more.
All right, cool. So those are the 3 books that we can study further to get more information.
A lot of study.
A lot of it. All right, so now we have come for a Q&A session.
Sure.
Shall we open up to the floor on how to do it?
So you can use the chat box. Just type in the chat, and we're really welcoming any question. If you want to talk and share, you can do as well. Just type in the chat that you'd like to talk, and we unmute you and welcome your sharing.
So now is a great time for you to type in or ask any questions at all that's in your mind. Just let us know and we will unmute you and you can share. While waiting for them to ask the question, in Malaysia, how do you find so far coaching in Malaysia?
It's a very rich experience because you have different cultures that are living in parallel. So people from one culture will not necessarily react exactly the same way as people in another culture. So working in Luxembourg was slightly different because though people may not speak the same language, they would roughly dress the same, or they would roughly eat the same food, or they would celebrate more or less the same festivals. So in that sense, the culture were more integrated than they are in Malaysia. So in terms of coaching, the definition of identity for each person will be more different, more unique in Malaysia than it was in Luxembourg.
So the diversity of it.
Yes. And how you define your identity is also different, in the sense that in Malaysia it's pretty common that people share about their race and share about their kampung, so the place they come from, share about their religion, all things that are not necessarily prevalent in Europe. I would rarely see people in Europe who will introduce them by race, even less in France where it's illegal to discriminate on that. And religion, not so much. And the place where you come from could, but it's not necessarily very, very important for people to shape their identity.
And how about in terms of the usage of the medium of coaching? We have a question from Stefan. Do you have any tips on how to manage the difference of energy level due to time difference, like when you coach people during nighttime in the USA, when it is morning in Malaysia, and the opposite?
Yeah, that's very interesting. That goes back to contracting. And we have a webinar on that tonight about contracting with Jose. When we agree to work with someone who is who has a very large time difference, we need to contract on what is the best time for both. What I mean by both is that we should not sacrifice ourselves and go to the extra mile at the expense of the quality of what we do in coaching. So for example, so we need to know ourselves. And so in that sense, I used to have clients in Europe and I was coaching them very late in the evening, so 10 p.m. to 11 p.m. And after a while, I'd really noticed that the quality of my coaching was really not as high as in other time during the day. So I finally declined to do so, just because that was, for me, not really providing the quality that was the best that they could expect from me. It doesn't mean we never can, but we also need to take into consideration that if this is putting a lot of pressure on the coachee to perform at a time where they have such a low energy, we may not even be the right person to coach.
All right.
And we may have a network and refer to that person.
So therefore, sometimes because of the time difference, you might introduce them to a different coach, maybe nearer to them, or the similar time zone as well. You might do that. But if I really, really have to coach this person and the time zone is just different, any particular things to look for in that context?
So anything that would be helpful to ground ourselves is helpful. Then there's also all that part about self-care. And we have a webinar on that with Katrina. So what do I need to really maintain my own energy at a very high level so that I'm actually providing a real quality of service? Because really we need to be careful that if we do not provide a quality service, then the coaching results will also be impacted, as well as our reputation and the next stream of clients. So forcing ourselves into something could definitely be somehow detrimental.
Okay, so thank you, Stefan, for that question. And we have another one from Stone. Thank you, Marianne, for sharing, and I found it beneficial. My question is that when you are preparing a coaching for a client who come from a different culture, what do you think are the key things to do to prepare for the first session?
So find out what is the culture that this person belongs to. What is in the surrounding? So any festival, any major election, any major political trend, or any taboo subjects, then you need to find out how do people relate to each other. Do you need to pay extreme respect to your coachee because that person has a doctorate and you need to address to that person as doctor something or something? How do people address to each other? How people do relate to each other? So that you do not shock that person. You do not want to be the only one who call him Paul, where everyone is calling him doctor something, right?
That's right.
Unless you have agreed on that and it's absolutely doable. And you also need to gather some information around the festivals there, as well as something that would be major. And be grounded, have that positive mindset of you have the right to fail, being simple, being generous, having that lightness, that curiosity, and be conscious that that's part of cross-cultural coaching, that we won't know everything. And it's also the beauty of it, because we will be less judgmental.
All right, very good. So that's for Stone. And let me have a look at here, the Q&A. Questions from Oli under the Q&A segment. How would you set up a coaching session at the beginning to preempt and set context on the difference in culture so that everyone can be on the same page and will be understanding on the cultural differences? How do you set the context and make sure that everyone is on the same page?
So when I coach someone and I look so different, because most of the time people notice right away that I'm not Asian looking, you already set the context. Yes, it is absolutely obvious that we come from a different culture. And yet, I'm absolutely welcoming. So, and yet you will define some ground rules. So explaining what coaching is, and during that explanation, you will give your value. You will show them through. So for example, when you talk about coaching, it's creating a safe place where everything is welcome. And because we come from different cultures, it's actually welcome even if we have very different values, very different mindset. Or I'm here to support and care, but here are my boundaries. And we may have sometimes different boundaries because we come from different cultures. So here is my suggestion. Do we agree on that, or do we need to adjust anything? So that's part of the initial discussion. And that's why the more you do cross-cultural coaching, the more you identify what is actually your own culture and what's so specific about you and yourself that you want to share right away.
And at the same time, to respect their culture and their model of the world.
Yes.
I guess what's the beautiful about this as well is that it allows both culture to, on a long-term basis, both culture can actually assimilate and learn from each other as well.
That gives you the freedom to pick and choose what's actually beautiful in the other countries that you want to take for yourself.
True. All right, cool. So thank you so much, Marianne, for that. As a host, I find that even on a personal level, I learned a lot today. And so that's basically it for today on this session. And before you go, I'd like to let you know about what the upcoming session is really all about. So tonight we have a very interesting session. Let me just put up the slide for you. Just go out.
Yes, you have it. You had it.
I haven't shared. It doesn't click on that, yeah. So tonight at 8 p.m. we have contracting, a very, very important part of coaching. Shall we redefine it or should we call it dynamic contracting with Jose? And tomorrow morning, we'll talk about energy. So one of you asked about energy just now. How to manage energy to build relational presence by Felicia. And tomorrow night, we have emotion and coaching in the truest form by Rosalind. And then, see if they'll be able to see from here. Can they see from here?
Yeah.
And on Thursday morning, we have the importance of self-care as a coach by Katrina. Thursday night, we have I Am What I Am My Own Special Creation by John Fresor. It's about branding. And on Friday morning, we have Reflective Learning and Psychological Mindedness by Sim Chu. And on Friday night, Ethics, Typical Ethical Dilemmas We May Face as a Coach by Dr. Francis. Yeah. So on top of that, I have good news for you as well. And because this is the ACSM Online week, and we will actually have 3 online group supervision sessions over the several months with up to 3 supervisors and 1 supervisor per group. And each session lasts for about 2 hours. So the pricing for this series of 3 group supervisions for ACSM members will be 1,000 for all 3 sessions. This goes up to just about 300 ringgit per session. For EMCC, APR, and ICF Malaysia members, it's about 1,500. And for non-members, it's about 2,000 ringgit for all 3 sessions. And for more information and the details and the dates are available, you can actually go to the website here, acsm.asia/services/group supervision series, and do sign up for it, because definitely as a coach, to have a supervisor, it will be a big impact and it will guide you along the way. So once again, thank you very much, Marianne.
Most welcome.
Thank you, everyone.
Looking to see everyone at the next webinar, as well as to help on the group supervision. The group supervision series will be on these topics. So you will have 3 group supervision on cross-cultural coaching, 3 group supervision on contracting, and so on and so forth. So you can pick and choose exactly what suits you best.
All right, cool.
Have a great day.
Thank you very much again. Thank you. All right. See you again. Bye.
And enjoy coaching.